we're currently working through John the Baptist's message and what the impact of John the Baptist's message was on himself. We were thinking about how so often success isn't talked about. We talk about how to deal with failure, but actually we don't often prepare ourselves for success. And John the Baptist was a success. His message had a powerful impact, and because of the powerful impact, people began to question who he was. They began to really appreciate him. There was a lot of adulation, there was political and public recognition, and all of those things are a heady mix of risk where so often it can lead to people falling, as we see so many times through history. But John the Baptist teaches us something more about how to deal with that success. And we're working through a number of different challenges, and the first response we see of John the Baptist to this success is how he deals with the challenge of status. We've already looked at the fact that there needs to be preparation, and John was very prepared for his ministry. But we also see that he had a clear understanding of his purpose, and because he had a clear understanding of his purpose, he was also able to resist the temptations of giving in to his status. But the third P that I want us to think about is that of perspective. And sitting here next to Loch Ness certainly gives you something of a perspective of your settings and your surroundings. For many of us, the perspective that we have of ourselves shapes how we respond to different things, and so often we can be our own worst critics. That sense of self-evaluation, self-assessment means that sometimes we can be too critical of ourselves, or we can go the other way and be too confident in ourselves. We can be too proud, and all those things are a risk. And often how we evaluate ourselves is linked to our own character, and that sense of self-perspective can actually be a challenge to how we deal with success. The crowd was questioning John. They were saying, "Are you the one that we've been waiting for?" And his response in verse 16 was, "No, I'm not even worthy to be his slave. I'm not even worthy to untie his messy, dirty, excrement-covered sandals." There was a real humility in John. There was an understanding of his own position in response to what he was called to do, and a real acceptance of that. John the Baptist knew that his role was to prepare the way for the Messiah. He was there to prepare the way for people to meet with Jesus. And he spent his entire time pointing people away from himself and towards Jesus. His core message was about repenting, getting right with God, and in that sense, he actually practiced what he preached. We often have an expression in our society of keep your eyes on the prize, and certainly that was John's perspective. He wasn't distracted by purpose, and he wasn't distracted either by that sense of perspective. One thing that can help us to learn from John is to maybe remind ourselves it's important to know whose we are. When we come into a relationship with God, we are part of God's family. We're accepted as part of that family. We can have confidence in knowing whose we are. But that means we can also have confidence in knowing where we are going and whom we serve. And all of those things allow us to keep in perspective any success that we might have. John the Baptist dealt with this challenge of status by understanding the challenge of perspective. And that perspective gave him a complete assurance of his faith. Sometimes I think we struggle to deal with perspective because we're trying to earn that sense of acceptance. We don't have a true perspective of whose we are, whom we serve, and where we're going. John was able to live in the true security of knowing whose he was and what his role was. And for you and me to deal with some of those challenges of success means to get on board in our own hearts that challenge of perspective and having a security of knowing our own true perspective.